Hello and welcome to Confronting Injustice. I am your host, Linda Solomon. James Watson joins me as we discuss the injustices of the criminal legal system. Our guest today is Tatiana Rodriguez, the founder and executive director of Family Matters First. Thank you for being with us today. And so Confronting Injustice, as you know, is concerned with injustices, sharing stories of injustice in the criminal legal system in the hopes that it is an invitation for people to rethink their narratives, right? And it's not just the criminal legal system, but it's systemic racism, bias, discrimination.
Yeah.
And you have a very intriguing, interesting story. So I'd like to start with you perhaps talking a bit about how you were able to go from a teenager in DCF custody to becoming the founder and executive director of a nonprofit that is concerned with dismantling that very system.
So hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me, and I was really delighted that I was invited to come speak because I think this is a very important matter.
Absolutely.
That is a very big part of the injustices that we are seeing here in Massachusetts and in America, but especially in Massachusetts, that claims to be so progressive. But basically, when I was a child in the system, I got to see it from many different angles. And I saw a lot of wrong things happening and they did not make sense. But at that time, it was just I was a child. I'm like, this is what it is. I have to figure out how to navigate this situation as best as possible because I can't change the situation. I have no control, no power.
Right.
Ultimately, DCF, which back then was known as DSS, and they try to change the name to make it sound like they got a little better. But in fact, I would say they probably have gotten worse over the years. So that's ultimately what led me. I had to advocate for myself a lot for things that adults should have already provided. There's policies, there's rules. Ultimately, DCF took the role of a parent, but they did not protect me as parents should. They did not do what was in my best interest. Think about having to take care of being a parent and having 50, 100 cases, children. That's not even natural. So.
How old, you said when you were a child, how old were you when you were in that system?
So I first got involved when I was about 8 years old. My mom overdosed on some pills, she tried to commit suicide. And she also had substance use issues. So I first got involved at that point, and originally I was with my grandmother. My mother did her work to get us back. She got clean and addressed her mental health issues, but she had to navigate things on her own. DCF didn't help her. They didn't provide her with services whatsoever. They just gave her a task list, the things that she needed to do, but they did not provide her with the services, which they are actually supposed to, on that list that they give you the service plan that they give you. They're supposed to provide you with those services, but they did not. But she still completed it on her own, and she got custody of me again. But then eventually ended up back in the same rodeo, and I ended up when I was 14 years old. She ended up back to substance use, and then we had many issues around that. I tried to go live with an aunt, but then ultimately I went back home because there's no place like home, but in the same sense it was unhealthy. So I actually called DCF on my mom that time.
Interesting. Okay. And you said that you had to maneuver and make decisions as a child that you should not have had to make. What impact that, well, let's back up a little. So you were in the system. You recognized that things were not happening the way they should have been happening for you, but you were able to kind of negotiate that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I would, I wanted to go to driving school. I wanted to get my license. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to get involved in like extracurricular activities and have it paid for, because my foster parents, they only get paid so much, right? I think you were a foster mom as well, so you only get
Yes.
paid so much. I basically had to navigate that, and really ultimately I didn't realize how messed up the system really was until I became an adult. Like that's when I look back and I'm like, oh my God, this is what was happening all along. And now I have more context behind it and why it's happening.
All right. And then what prompted you to take this on as a career, as a mission?
So I think that for a while, I've had this like fighter in me. Like I want to fight for what's right. I see what's going on around the world. I see what's going on right in my city, with the racial biases and the injustices in the court system. I mean, I'm in court like all the time, supporting brothers and sisters, helping those that are wrongfully convicted behind the wall. Like I'm seeing all these injustices in front of me. But ultimately what ended up happening is I ended up being involved with DCF as an adult. So my son's father was abusive. And I tried to go the route of filing police reports to try to scare him to like calm down. I tried to do like family therapy and like do interventions myself, because I knew that the system doesn't even help victims. So like the criminal justice system has always failed everyone that I've known, so when I try to go that route, it wasn't working. Ultimately, DCF got involved. They the police filed the 51A on my son's father because he choked me in front of my son. And when they found him neglectful, they didn't make him do a service plan. They didn't make him do anything to hold him accountable. Or to even help him with his issues, because clearly something's wrong with him, and I've gotten restraining orders from the family court. The family court. She's been in our lives since my son was born, and she's given us probably 3 restraining orders, but she never not one system has referred my son's father to anger management, to therapy, to any of that, to things that usually you would think that would happen, right? Like when DCF gets involved, you think like, oh my God, they're gonna make you do this, but they didn't make him do anything. They just said that because I'm the primary caretaker, and I was fit to be a mom, that they were gonna close our case and that was it. And I said, but the dad still needs services. I'm still entitled to give him visitations through the courts, and you guys are supposed to help advocate for me and help me. Right now is not a safe situation for me to put myself or my son in harm's way.
No, where did you want to?
When you say she, who are you referring to?
The judge.
Okay. All right. So as an adult, then you find yourself back in the system looking for protection. To no avail. You didn't get the protection you needed?
No, I did not. And I had to take it in my own hands. So like I said, DCF failed. Then the judge, I went to get an emergency removal because he continued to violate his restraining order. So not even the restraining order helped. He was threatening me, et cetera, et cetera. So I ended up going to court. I retained an attorney. That attorney that I retained, later on I found out that he was suspended. So he never showed up to my emergency removal, but when he came late actually. So he never showed up on time. He came late and it was already too late. The judge just closed the case. And he told me that I could still move to North Carolina as long as I still came back for court, which was in a few months in August. So I left in June. He told me to come back in August. I cooperated. I came back. He was nowhere to be found. He left with all my evidence. He just never showed up.
The lawyer?
The lawyer. So I come that same week that I came back, my son's father violated his restraining order again by chasing me, trying to crash into me. I had video footage. I called the police and filed a report. And still, the judge ordered me to move back to Massachusetts within 30 days. Financially, that was impossible. I was living in North Carolina where the minimum wage is like 3 times like less than here.
Right.
So it was impossible. And I told her, I said, Your Honor, 30 days is not sufficient. Can I get more time? She said no. She was very upset. She was enraged. So fast forward, I ended up losing my son. She reversed custody to my son. And mind you, this is the same judge that terminated his visits earlier that year. But all because she was upset that I didn't go her way, she reversed custody to my abuser, who was never really there to begin with. He didn't really have a relationship, a bond with my son. So she just literally like went against her own word. Why did she terminate his visits to begin with? And then later on that year, flipped custody to my abuser.
How long ago was that? And I would imagine that that must be what is inspiring you or motivating you to do the work that you're doing now.
So that's ultimately what led me. So if I didn't go through what I went through with my son, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. But when I realized that, I started to realize there was something more wrong with the system, not just like a parent made a mistake and then like they lost custody of their kids. I started to realize when I started meeting with other parents on a monthly meeting with CPCS, which is the Public Defenders of Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And I started hearing other people's stories and I'm like, we have to do something about this. Like there's so many of us on here, we're sharing the same story. We cannot sit back and continue to let this happen because there's more kids are gonna fall victim to the system. And once you're in DCF, that basically, it makes you vulnerable into entering the carceral system, into entering DYS, and then from DYS you end up being an adult and ending up in prison. So I decided that I'd continue to meet, which away from CPCS, because CPCS is just like, you can't do like legal legislative work there. So I decided to continue to meet with these parents and they agreed, and we would meet every Wednesday in March of 2021. We would meet every Wednesday, organizing protests, supporting legislation, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what ultimately led me to starting this organization.
What is the name of your organization?
Family Matters First.
And you are the
founder and the executive director for now.
Come a long way.
Thank you.
And the mission.
So how much progress do you believe you have made since you started?
Well, I'd like to say that I've made some progress. I've raised a lot of awareness, to the point where I've been invited to like speak at Harvard, to speak to lawyers that are student attorneys that are getting ready to graduate. I've been invited to just speak on certain panels. Okay. I'm a part of the Court Improvement Task Force, which addresses DCF. We address the budget and how that's spent. Mm-hmm. So I'm basically like infiltrating like systems and making sure that the other side of the story is heard, not just, oh, the child was removed, but why was the child removed? Because there's so much secrecy to what's going on. There's not transparency in these processes, and people don't know what's going on in Massachusetts courthouse, in the juvenile courthouse, and in DCF. So, it's just me creating this movement, I would say, which I'm one of the first organizations in Boston to basically go against DCF and hold them accountable and ask that they be transparent and ask that they uphold their policies and do what's right by families.
It's interesting. So, excuse me, we had a conversation earlier and you said that this is not so much about reform anymore.
No.
That it's it's a whole different.
Well, I think we're past that conversation. I think that even with the police, just all around, like with police brutality and all these systems, we're past the reform conversation. Because how do we reform a system that was built literally off of oppression, off of keeping one race down and making the other one rise up? Like, how do we reform that? It's built off of racist principles. How do you reform? It doesn't matter how many black people you hire to work for the system that was rooted in racism. If you look at the Constitution, it was created by white men, So like, how do we reform that? And we've tried to reform it throughout the years, and we've just been feeding a system with money to continue to harm us and separate us, because ultimately their mission is not to keep children and families together. Because look at the population of the children that are in the system. If you look, black and brown children are 2.3 times more likely to enter into the foster care system than their white peers, so that's an issue.
And it also is an issue that 80%, if I'm not mistaken, 80% of people who are incarcerated were in the DCF system.
Yeah, so if you go into a prison right now and you ask, 80% of people in prison were once in foster care.
That's just incredible.
That just speaks volumes to like how broken that system is.
Right. So how has your relationship been with DCF? I would imagine you've tried to work with them and realize that you're at a point where you have to go a different route.
So DCF doesn't like me. So what I do is I advocate for parents. So right now, I do court support, but I also will go to the service plan meetings, like foster care reviews, and I serve as an advocate. So I ask questions. I also have the experience of working at group homes. So I know what's actually happening behind the scenes, such as like over medicating children, over diagnosing children, kind of just to control and keep the business going.
And I have to ask you this because it's so difficult to believe that this would be true, that children are medicated as a form of control. And is that, for people who, again, this is an invitation to rethink your narrative, right? Because some people, even when I heard it myself, I thought, wow. But I've heard stories about even babies were given cough medicine so they can sleep in foster homes. So this is something that you know firsthand. This is not...
No, this is firsthand. I've saw it firsthand. I've been in conversations with others as well. And I think ultimately it's an oversaturated system. So ultimately, if you look, and I always like to explain it this way, right? Everything's a business.
Right.
And business, right? Everything is a business. So in order for a business to work, you need what? Productivity. And what's the productivity in DCF? The children, right? So if you know that, if you look at things from a business aspect, because I'm in school for business management, and that's when I started to think about it in this way, and it actually like opened up my eyes on a whole nother level, and it helped me to understand why we're sitting here even talking about this, is because ultimately, if you look at the laws in place, so there's CAPTA, which is a federal bill that reimburses states for the amount of children that they have in foster care, which is now incentivizing them to produce more children and who
system.
ends up getting affected?
Families, communities.
Families
Children.
of color,
Right.
right? Because we've always been at the bottom. It's always been, and that's why, I mean, it's not only black, brown, but poor. So if you don't have the representation, you don't have counsel, you don't have, you could fall victim as well. But majority of the people being affected is black and brown children. And I don't know if have you ever heard of the book Torn Apart by Dorothy Roberts?
No.
So I think everybody should read this. It's called Torn Apart by Dorothy Roberts. She's also an abolitionist.
Okay.
And she talks about how from the beginning of time when slavery was abolished, that, that's when they started giving court orders to the slave masters because financially the slaves couldn't take care of their kids, so they would separate them. Same thing is happening today, nowadays in age, it's just happening in a different way.
Yeah.
Now we're being punished for being poor.
Yeah.
So if we don't have we may not have enough money, the resources to get therapy, to get the help that we need to recuperate from what the government has done to us. Because I think it's all post-traumatic slavery, disorder, and that's a whole nother conversation.
And that is a whole nother conversation, but it's true. And, it's not, so two things. So the system is disproportionately affecting
Black,
brown, and poor white people. Because if you're white and you're poor, you fall in that same pool of disenfranchised or people who are just at the mercy of someone else.
Yep.
The other thing I wanted to say is that, this whole children being taken away is not new to the United States because it happened to indigenous Native American children as well. And we tend to not talk about that a lot, but the atrocities that happen.
And we're talking about the separation of the kids at the border, but we're not talking about the separation of kids every day at the borders of Roxbury, Mattapian, Cambridge. We're not talking about those, but it's happening every day.
It is.
It's just not as publicized.
Right. So Tati, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Most of the kids that you see out here in the street, the young kids, are runaways.
Yeah, they are runaways.
Runaways. And where they run from? Not from home, because they are in DSS.
Yep, from DSS.
They ran from DSS.
Even if you go down to the Boston Commons and you ask those homeless people out there, probably 90% of them will tell you that they were in foster care.
Right.
Okay.
Then they go from there to the Department of Youth Services, which is Youth Service Board. You know what I'm talking about, Youth Service Board.
Yeah, so another way is education in the schools. The schools, when there's kids having behavior issues that they may be having, right? A lot of our kids have that, they automatically want to over-diagnose, and then they want to put a CRA, which is back in the days was called the chins, which is used as a tool to prey on poor people and say, hey, your kid needs extra support, and to get this support, you have to,
File of chins.
you have to file a CRA, a chins, and to get them, but that's not true. We can get those same services. I mean, my mother has gotten the services. I've gotten services without having to use them. These are services that we all can get, but they use it as a manipulation tactic to put you in that situation. And when the kid, obviously, you're not giving the kid the tools, the actual tools that they really need, because they don't even know how to, they say that we can't take care of our kids, but they actually don't know how to take care of them, because anybody could take a kid and medicate them.
Right. It's for people who may be totally removed from this whole DCF and this whole realm, and have this narrative that if you're in foster care, you must have parents who are drug addicts, or if you're a youth offender, then you must be looking for trouble. What do you say to people whose worldview is so far removed that it would be difficult for them to hear what you're saying?
Well, I would just say, first of all, we're all humans, right? We all make mistakes, but why does the mistake have to be me? Why can't it be the system? Why are we not questioning DCF? Why are we not questioning the judge? So the more and more we have these conversations and we continue to have dialogue with our experiences, then we can understand and we can see eye to eye. But I'm a human being just like you. So if you feel like, I just feel like just educate yourself, talk to people that are going through it, that have lived it. Don't just hear because DCF and you think these are the saviors. And no, we need to start questioning them and investigating, and transparency. Why don't we question, why isn't there a level of transparency? Why don't we question, why does juvenile courts, which is DCF, right? Why is it a closed courtroom? Why can't the public hear that? That's what they need to question.
I have two other things because we'll be wrapping up. So I'm just taken by the fact that your judge, who deemed your baby's dad unfit and a danger, and thus awarded a restraining order, then a year later gave him custody. That's beyond my comprehension. I don't understand how that could happen, and I have to apologize for that happening to you.
Thank you.
What is your recourse when it comes to that? If the judge is not being reasonable, or what is your recourse for that, one? And then you refer to yourself as an abolitionist. Can you help people to understand what an abolitionist is?
Sure. So number one, my recourse to the judge, I would say that honestly, I don't really have anything to say. I just feel like,
Not so much to her, but the fact that this is happening, and once a judge makes a decision, who do you go to if what that
so
judge
that's
is?
it. I mean, there's no going around it. So the judge, in order to get that judge removed, you need to ask her or him to recuse themselves. And most likely, when it's a personal feeling, when there's a bias and it's a personal thing, they're not going to recuse because
So
they're
you're
so.
stuck.
I'm
So
stuck.
you're stuck.
Yeah, I'm stuck.
Okay.
So I basically have to kiss her ass. Like,
Ooh,
sorry, excuse me.
sorry. And the last thing would be, what is an abolitionist for people who do not know? What is an
So
abolitionist?
an abolitionist is someone that I can tell you what I am. I'm an
Okay.
abolitionist, and I believe that we do not need these systems in place. So, for example, DCF, we don't need DCF, right? We have, and I think being a part of participatory defense, Families for Justice is Healing, having that like structural, me starting there and getting connected to you guys and other people that are out here doing this work. I think that we have a strong foundation in the supports that we have. When a brother's coming home, we pick up the phone and we're like, hey, so-and-so's coming home, we need an apartment. I think that the same thing for DCF. So we can respond in different ways. We still believe that we can keep children safe. Child safety does not look like DCF. Child safety looks like community and us.
Listen, thank you so much for being our guest, Tatiana
You're
Rodriguez. And we just wish you all the luck that, we just want you to be successful with your endeavor with Families Matter First.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we're willing to come back. There's still a lot to talk about.
Okay.
Good
I'll
luck
be
with
back.
your case. Thank you.